Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Again, our guest today is Michael Parent, and he's joining us again. He is a returning guest. He was here as a guest in episode 395. If you want to go check that out, look in the feed or go to leanblog.org/395. Michael is the managing director of his company, Michael Parent Consulting Services. He is also a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt with AAA Auto Club Group. Before I tell you a little bit more, let me say, first off, welcome back, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Mark. How are you?
I am great. How are things in southeastern Michigan?
They're great. They are sunny today, a little chilly, but we've got 60s in the forecast coming up. So that's good for March.
Yes, as we're recording this at the end of March, baseball season is coming soon. Spring will hopefully be there. I know it could snow even once the Tigers start playing, but hopefully that's behind you. But part of our reason for getting together today, not just to reminisce, because Michael lives pretty close to where I grew up in Livonia, Michigan, as we touched on briefly before. Michael has a new book that has been recently released here in April. It's titled The Lean Innovation Cycle, a Multi-Disciplinary Framework for Designing Value with Lean and Human-Centered Design. That is out from Routledge Press. So today we're going to take a deep dive into those topics, looking at kind of complementary nature, intersection, comparisons between lean and human-centered design frameworks. So, before we dive into the details, I always like to ask authors, Michael, like what was the spark? What was the inspiration for doing a book?
Yeah, it's just something I guess I've kind of always wanted to do, but how this one came about was really I just felt like I wanted to learn more about it. And I'm sure, you've written several books, and I think you even told me with Measures of Success, right? Mm-hmm. That was something that you wanted to learn more about. So, you do deep dives in it, you do literature reviews, you research it yourself almost as an independent study. And it really helps to retain the knowledge, to write something about it, to kind of put your spin on it. And that's essentially, the inspiration for it.
So what's, we're going to talk about the topics, in some detail here. Is there anything that comes to mind that you learned in particular during the writing of the book, or even like after the book has been done, as you continue thinking about all this?
Yeah, I think a lot about the publishing process in particular is something I learned quite a bit about. I learned it's very important to have a market-driven idea, an idea that is, I don't want to say sellable, that's a little too cynical, but something that's resonating with the audience right now in particular. So that was something I really learned a lot of.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that's cynical. That's it's practical, right? I mean,
that's right.
I think as an author of a book, you want to write a book that's going to help people. And so getting some sense of the voice of the customer is important. How did you do that during or before the writing process, even then?
Yeah, I did a lot of market research, figuring out what books were out there. Like I said, this is something that was peculiar to me, something that I have, done some stuff in, practical in as well, and did some training in. And then as I kind of looked for more in this realm of, hey, how are people using this with Lean and Six Sigma? I didn't find anything. And I said, well, let me go find a book. Maybe it's not an online thing or a YouTube thing. Surely somebody's written a book about it. And I didn't see a whole lot of that out there as well. So, all that is, I guess kind of sparked it.
Yeah. And so this phrase, human-centered design, what would you say is a good operational definition of that phrase? What does that mean practically speaking?
Yeah, human-centered design is a problem-solving framework, just like Lean and Six Sigma. I would say there's a set of tools that go hand in hand with human-centered design, but just like Lean and Six Sigma, human-centered design is greater than just the toolbox. And essentially, what you're trying to do in human-centered design through this framework is design something, really, I guess, to empathize with the end user, to empathize with the customer, and say, because I understand what they think and what they want and what they feel and what they desire, I can create a product that delivers more value to them than I would otherwise be able to do without this framework.
So it's really more of a product development, product design framework that might fit together within, let's say, the lean manufacturing of said product?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. I mean, process improvement, I think if you stretch the definition a little bit, you can probably say it's a lot of process design. There's a lot about there's a lot of design capacities within what we do from the sheer process improvement stuff. But then certainly things like design for Six Sigma, there's huge overlaps between human-centered design and some of the more rigorous design components of Six Sigma.
Mm-hmm. And this is an approach that could apply not just to hard products that would be manufactured, but also to different services.
Yes, absolutely. I think in the book I end up saying product a lot, but of course, when you think about human-centered design, you're always thinking about the end user's experience. User experience is a buzzword in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And of course, service operations have the end user experience, right? Call center wait times. Again, that's very process driven. It's very process improvement oriented, but you can see how understanding the end user experience can really have an impact in how you design that process.
Mm-hmm. So it can apply to, I imagine, software. You could think about human-centered design. I mean, is that something that could apply to consulting services and thinking about the client experience along the way?
I certainly didn't think about that. I didn't bring it up in the book, but I think one of the big tenets, maybe one of the themes that you get out of human-centered design is that transparency is always a good thing. The end user loves knowing what to expect, or the more you can broadcast what the product is, what the service is, the more the end user will feel comfortable with that. That's true in packaged goods. You walk into any grocery store, everything is in a clear plastic case because you have to see what the product is. I think similar principles can be applied to consulting.
Yeah, I think when there are bad assumptions or just if a consultant and a client are not on the same page is where little like potential fractures in that relationship can build up. So yeah, I would agree with you. Giving transparency at different stages just maybe helps people highlight a small concern before it becomes a big problem.
That's right.
Yeah. How would you compare human-centered design with something I've learned a little bit more about over time, design thinking? Is there similarity? How do those fit?
Yeah, human-centered design and design thinking, I think, are very interchangeable terms. And if you're in the industry, they would probably say that no, design thinking is this, and human-centered design is over here. But for our purposes, for the purposes of the audience listening to this podcast, I'd say they're more or less interchangeable. Human-centered design is focused deeply on understanding the end user and empathizing with their experience. So a lot of the tools are really Gemba focused to figure out what they're actually experiencing and feeling. Design thinking, I think, is a little bit more about prototyping, low resolution prototyping, how you engage the end user, not to sell them on the prototype per se, but really just to get candid feedback about that prototype for them.
So it sounds like there's a different mindset. Earlier, you talk about tools versus mindset. The mindset is not proving yourself right. The mindset is thinking, hey, I could be wrong, or this is likely imperfect. How do I get useful feedback?
Yeah, exactly. If you have to sell somebody on your design, it's not a very good design. If you have to tell somebody how to use the design, it's not a good design. Intuition is a huge part of design thinking. It's a huge part of any design process, whether that's a service process or something that we do in traditional lean manufacturing, or if it's designing an actual product.
I mean, it seems like part of the overlap is having this customer focus, if not customer obsession.
Yeah.
And I mean, even I think this is from the Toyota Way. Even though that's a book in a way focused on manufacturing, you can think about the design processes and how that flows into manufacturing and manufacturability. But there are stories, if I'm remembering right, of like the first generation Toyota minivan not doing well in the U.S. market. among other, I think some of the reasons pointed to were lack of cup holders, because that's maybe a uniquely American dynamic of requiring a lot of cup holders, even for the driver, big cup holders. And then I think the other dynamic was, the back of the minivan. Maybe this is a pickup truck story, but anyway, with one of the vehicles, discovering that Americans are much more likely to go, to the big box home improvement store and be bringing home large pieces of wood that didn't fit well in the first generation vehicle. So and there are stories in the book then of, I think, one of the chief engineers from Japan coming over and renting American vehicles and driving across the US and Canada and observing customers and how they were actually using the vehicles. It seems like it's better than making assumptions or trying to prove, well, you don't, try to prove you shouldn't need cup holders. Well, good luck with that, right?
Yeah, right. You're not going to sell an American audience on that. They'll just go to Ford or GM or Chrysler or something like that.
Yeah.
You can see the parallels between Gemba, is probably what that story is all about in the lean manufacturing world. But this is, what we would call, user engagement or something like that, where, and even within that, one of the things I like about human-centered design is it really informs us how we approach the Gemba. You're going to have different audiences. The single mom who has 2 kids is going to know how to use a grocery cart in a grocery store far better than the bachelor who's picking up, the ice cream on a Wednesday night. So you've got, categories of users, super users, extreme users, casual users, mainstream users, and how you compartmentalize these will change how you interact with them, what insights you gather from them, and what kind of questions, how you're actually observing them. So I think there's a lot there that can be taken, at face value in human-centered design and brought right into the fold of lean and manufacturing.
And so part of what I hear you're saying is, when we talk about voice of the customer, we shouldn't assume all customers are the same. So does human-centered design give us some methods for sort of segmenting or thinking about different groups of customers that would have different needs, different use cases?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, it ends up being strategy. Who am I actually trying to market to? So that's one thing, is who am I actually trying to sell to? But then you might, the extreme users are going to be niche, right? They're going to be there, and it's going to be a small market, but they're also going to know exactly what the thresholds of the current product offering is. They're going to know exactly, if you ask them, what would you like different in this? They're going to know exactly what it is. Yeah, this is my limiting factor. This is my constraint. And if you could loosen this constraint, I would be much happier for it. The general audience might not have those insights, though they could benefit from them. They might just say, no, I like the shopping cart the way it is. And that's fine. And they would have never guessed that you could have, a personal scanner that you go around the grocery store and scan things with. So yeah, understanding, yes, who you're selling to, but also, are you going on a fact-finding mission for something other than just selling to a customer?
Yeah. So you mentioned shopping carts. I mean, I think most shopping carts now have that seat in the very front where a child of a certain size can ride and face whoever's pushing the cart. I'm sure at some point I sat in that seat, but I'm sure at some point the shopping basket was assumed only to be for the items you're purchasing. And, I'd be curious if somebody had the spark of that idea by maybe watching a child being in a cart in a way that might be kind of unsafe or uncontrolled. Watching a parent struggle to keep their kid with them in the store. And so there at some point I'd be curious the history of that. I'm not expecting you to know it, Michael, but like that, I mean, it seems like if human-centered design, I'm going to assume that improvement to the shopping cart predates these methodologies, but it seems like maybe it's not too much of a stretch where you might identify the need for that improvement to the shopping cart by literally going out, like you said, to the Gemba, the place where the cart's actually used, and observe people using the cart. You would get different insights than if you just asked people about carts, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing in the book. I'm not too keen on focus groups for the very same reasons, right? Is is what people say they want and what people actually want are very, very different. And that's, I mean, just Google survey bias, and you'll see a list of all these ways it can be biased. But if you actually go and observe, and maybe you interview them, maybe you just sit in an Ono circle and watch people going through the produce section, and you'll see how people are actually using the cart, and you'll see what's limiting them. So I really, that's the lean ethos, right? Is we're going to observe the current state, and then we're going to make improvements. We're not just going to interview people.
Yeah. And I think of, an additional, we're getting into the weeds on shopping carts here, but I use shopping carts, so it comes to mind. At one point, there was the improvement of the cup holder. Back to cup holders again, of, you may buy a beverage at the coffee stand or a water, and you're drinking that beverage as you're going through the store. Recently, I came across, if somebody from a grocery store company or shopping cart maker was watching me, I'd done some grocery shopping and then stopped at the in-store Starbucks to get not just a beverage for myself on the way home, but for my wife. And I ended up in this situation where there was one cup holder, I had two beverages, and because the door coming out that side of the store was not an automatic open door, I was in this awkward situation of putting one drink in the cup holder with the cart and another drink, and trying to imagine, like, how do I open the door with my elbow or my hip in a way? It was, thankfully, another customer saw I was needing some help and went ahead and pushed the door open. But I mean, maybe all these things together, it's not just the cart, but even the design of the store, of somebody noticing maybe we need an automated door at that spot.
And, in the store, you're taking for granted that there's now a Starbucks in every Target or grocery store that you walk into. That wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago, right? So it's almost like you can, I don't know if this is the case, but, people probably observe, hey, all these people are coming in the grocery store with a Starbucks in their hand. They're getting their fix before they come into the store. Wouldn't it be great if we just had one here? And clearly that's worked because they have them everywhere, right?
Yeah. The one other thing I was going to ask you that you said earlier, I think would be interesting to have you elaborate on this phrase, converging toward a design, whether that involves prototypes or not. Can you tell us more about that? Do you have an example of what it means to converge toward a design?
Yeah. There's, when you do things creatively, like brainstorming, and this is true in the lean world, when you affinity diagram and you're trying to generate solutions, you have to suspend criticism. You're not going to be able to both be creative and evaluate at the same time. So a lot of the techniques that come from human-centered design are also to kind of segment your workflow into creative sections, which I call divergent. So, we're going to come up with all these ridiculous ways to improve the shopping cart, or we're going to be stuck on the shopping cart for the rest of our conversation.
Sorry.
We're going to come up with all these ways to, improve it. But then at some point, we're going to have to converge. We have finite resources and we have to move our project along. So we're going to need to figure out some constraints. The constraints might be weight, or it might be, feasibility in manufacture. That's something we talked about already, manufacturability. It might be the cost to actually manufacture the product. So all these things, by putting in some constraints, we can start to weed out some of the factors that it takes to improve it. And then we're left with kind of more of a dominant design that we can continue to work on, converge, fine tune, get it in front of the customer. The customer's interaction with a prototype is a huge way to converge, because they're going to tell you exactly what they don't like about it, what doesn't make sense to them, they don't know how to use it. All of those things are essentially converging around a solution. Oh, it has to be more intuitive to use. It has to be lighter weight. They can't pick it up. These sorts of things. So it's a push and pull kind of, where maybe not push and pull, but it's, you've got one aspect of, you're trying to be creative, you're trying to generate solutions, and then with a delicate balance, you're also trying to converge onto something that's feasible, that the customer actually, or I'll say the end user actually wants.
Yeah. It seems like, a push and pull seems like a good way of describing, where maybe some organizations pay research and development people or product development people to dream up ideas that might be pushed out on the market, where there's maybe an approach for customer pull. It may be through their words, or as you're talking about and as you're writing about, it may come out through observing what they're accomplishing or what they're unable to accomplish given current versions of a product.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So before taking a deeper dive into some of the connections here, I'd ask you up front, what sparked the book, but maybe even going back a little bit earlier than that, Michael, what sparked your interest in moving beyond Lean and Six Sigma into even exploring human-centered design?
Yeah, I was in an MBA course at the College of William and Mary, and one of the first courses I took was in human-centered design thinking, and I was blown away by it. I think at that time I wasn't a full black belt yet in Six Sigma, but I definitely saw parallels. And one of the activities that I had to do was they gave me the prompt, design a wallet. And I said, this is gonna be a piece of cake. Like I know what my wallet looks like. I want to design something like that. And then I got paired with a woman in my group, and female ideas of wallets are very different than men's ideas. They have different constraints. It doesn't have to fit into their back pocket. They might want things more than just a couple credit cards and their ID. So as you start really empathizing with what other people's constraints are, it took me in a radically different direction of what my preconceived notions were. So I saw direct value from that. And that really started sparking kind of my interest in human-centered design. I'll also say I'm left-handed, and you don't get very far in life as a lefty without noticing that everything is designed for a right-handed person. And that, as you kind of have this framework, it kind of resonated with me to say, there's a way I can, start taking back a little bit, and try using a chainsaw with your left hand is all I have to say.
I mean, scissors came to mind. My
Yeah,
mother's left-handed, so I remember the frustration of, as a righty, grabbing the left-handed version of something. I'm just looking here on my desk. I'm not going to go through everything on my desk. Thankfully, the stapler is sort of an ambidextrous design, but even looking at my keyboard and trackpad, at least maybe there's flexibility. Do you put the mouse or the trackpad over to the left for your dominant hand?
Yes, I do. You'll notice that the arrow keys are on the right-hand side, as is the number pad, if you have that, which is a biased for the right-handed person. If you use anyone else's mouse, the buttons themselves, you will have to click. So it's not just a matter of positioning on the desk. It's actually the buttons. You'll have to click with your middle finger. So we can keep going if you want.
No, that's all right. I mean, it's good to think through. It's a good example of empathy and customer understanding, of not assuming every customer is like you, whether that's
right,
gender or handedness, or there are even some stories out there in tech world of when certain products don't get tested on a range of people with different skin colors, that there can be problems or assumptions that come out of that. So back to that point of not all customers being the same or having the same needs. So yeah, in the book, you explore a lot of the overlap and either similarity or complementary nature to Lean and Six Sigma. So how would you describe that in a nutshell of what human-centered design adds to Lean or Six Sigma?
Yeah, I think it informs a lot of what we do. I think there are things, like I said, you can take for face value, like different interactions on the Gemba. I think there's a strong additive relationship that we can just grab that and throw it into the fold of Lean and Six Sigma. I think there are other things like the environment of how we engage the Obeya, right? When we set up an Obeya room, I go into it a little bit in the book of, almost a worker space. What does that look like for a creative process to generate new ideas? The physical space is so important in Lean, and we need to understand that when we're trying to be creative, because it's not just having visual management and charts on the board, like we would in Obeya. But certainly there are areas like that. And then I think it ultimately drives, I think there's a lot of additive value with adding value and getting to what the customer actually desires and wants. I think that's really, the ethos of Lean, and any tool that we can use to accomplish that should be welcomed in the Lean community.
Yeah. And as a terminology check for listeners who might not know, Obeya or Obeya Room is sometimes called Big Room, or some people use War Room or Strategy Deployment Room. I've heard different phrases, but that is a part of, and you touched on this in the book, what's either called Strategy Deployment or Hoshin Kanri.
Yep.
And it seems like when you have these boards on the wall in these rooms, there's an opportunity to think of, I'm curious your thoughts on this, like human-centered design in terms of how the board is put together. Like, are the charts readable and understandable in the way that they're formatted and displayed? Is the X matrix a tool that's readable or intimidating? There's a lot of debate around that.
Right. Yeah. When we're talking about the Obeya too, I always think of the NASA command in Houston, right? Everybody's facing the same direction. That's important. Everybody's on the same page. There's the same objective. Everybody has the same data. The screen, especially like the 1960, Apollo 13 mission or whatever, they've got the same stuff on the board. Everybody's on the same page. I think that there's a huge part of the physical layout, but then to your point of, are these tools actually approachable? I think that is probably a gray area that is not just about the tools, but also applies to how we engage people, our stakeholders, and are we actually having respect for people by training them and getting them to buy into the tools, or are we just giving them a template and say, fill out the X matrix?
Yeah. I mean, the same thing can apply to an A3, and at its worst, at its worst, I'll hear people talk about, I've heard this in healthcare, could happen other places, of having a metric of, well, it's easy to track, well, how many A3s have been quote unquote filled out? I mean, like filling out the form and using it well are not necessarily the same thing. So a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, and I think in terms of maybe similarities in terms of tools, things that may have a similar mindset. When I hear people talk about mapping a customer journey, how does that, in your mind, Michael, connect to the idea of value stream mapping?
Yeah, I like to use something that they call customer. What do they call it? Yeah, customer journey value stream mapping is, I think, what I call it in the book.
Kind of a hybrid.
Yeah, exactly. And essentially, you have to understand process. That's just fundamental to what we do. Every business, everything is based on it. But when you understand process as well as kind of those emotional components of how the customer feels during these process moments, you can start to understand a greater empathy for that person. So in the book, I go into a very famous example of Procter and Gamble. I believe it was them going in and trying to sell more household cleaner products. And what came out of it was the Swiffer, because they understood the process that, wow, there's a lot of non-value added, yes, from the lean perspective, of filling up a bucket of water, waiting for the water to get hot, adding the soap, moving the heavy bucket to the workstation, right? Because you're filling it up in the bathtub. All of this has a process component, which you could say is non-value added. Yes. But I mean, it's frustrating to sit there and wait for the water to heat up and you're wasting water. It's difficult, if you're using the laundry sink downstairs, to carry it up the stairs. So when you start to really put the empathy behind these process tasks, not just the non-value added, though that's part of it, you really start to dial in to areas of really great improvement, and then you can really start to pivot on what your design is. And in that example, their design was not to create a new household tool called the Swiffer. It was to sell more cleaning product.
Yeah. I mean, and that's been very it seems like a very successful product over a couple of decades of
Right.
both the dry and then the wet version that sprays instead. So it eliminates the need for carrying that bucket around.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And the waiting. Yep.
Yep.
And the drying.
And they sell those refills that snap in perfectly. That's probably a good margin compared to a generic bottle of soap.
Right. For sure.
That's why I'm pretty sure that's one of those models, like they talk about the razors and blades business model. You basically give away the razor or the Swiffer, knowing that you're going to sell compatible things. And
yeah, the switching cost, right?
Yeah, and then as times change, or as things evolve, decades after the beginning of the Swiffer, you may have customers, the voice of the customer, who say, you know what, I'm uncomfortable with throwing that pad away, that Swiffer pad. And does that bring people back to more traditional brooms and mops that are more reusable?
Yeah, or possible product iteration of something that's biodegradable, or something like that. So I go into it briefly in the book, all about multi-generational product planning, right, and what that looks like. And certainly, razor blades is probably the best example of how many of those next generations do they just have sitting on the shelf. How many right. different iterations of Crest toothpaste do they already have developed? Years and years and years.
Yeah, the razor blade they're going to be selling 10 years from now could go on the market today, but not before they sell us the 6-blade razor, then the 7-blade razor. I think there was a Saturday Night Live parody of the razor with 100 blades or what have you.
Right.
People can go find that on YouTube or Peacock streaming, I'm sure. One of the things that's in the book, and I mean, it's interesting to me that some of these methods seem new. Some of these are time tested or predate lean even. So one of those that was jogging my memory was the Kano quality model. I mean, that was something that I learned about at MIT in 1999 in the context of a total quality management course. A course nowadays would be a Lean Six Sigma course. But
right.
Tell us about the Kano model. I think that's an interesting way of looking at different features, whether it's additional blades or the functionality of a smooth shave. We don't have to make it about razor blades, but tell us about the Kano model, because that's something a lot of people don't know.
I've always called it Kano. That's just my Midwestern accent coming out, the hard A. So, but Kano, I'm sure sounds way more. It sounds way more Japanese to say Kano. I'm
Kano. However we want to say it.
Yeah,
you can say it your way.
Yeah. So I'll say the Kano model or Kano model is, I think, one of the coolest ways to think about how we deliver value in terms of products. So essentially, Google, if you're listening to this, Google what the Kano model looks like. But essentially, it's a coordinate plane, and on the x-axis is customer satisfaction. It is product performance, which is essentially, how well does that product perform? And on the y-axis, you have customer satisfaction. And the idea here is that you're going to have different attributes of a product that fall into different categories of this coordinate plane. So some things we'll call table stakes. We can talk about all the things we want in a vehicle, but we probably won't even consider that the vehicle turns on, or that it's reliable, or that it passes emission standards. These are things that we're not even interested in the vehicle or the product if they don't meet our table stakes. Mm-hmm. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have things that we call delights, which are things that they don't even have to operate well. They're literally bells and whistles that delight us just by having it. I think now, if we continue using the vehicle analogy, assisted parallel parking, right? That's something that I don't know how well it works. Driver assist, where we've got things that kind of help us, assisted braking. These are things that we're not quite ready to say that it's autonomous driving or it's autonomous vehicles. It doesn't work to that extent yet, but we're still delighted by their inclusion. And then we also have what I would call performance attributes. These are things that more is better, more horsepower, more torque, more miles per gallon, more cargo loading. bigger is better in essentially this case. And then the final part of it, the Kano model, is that as time moves through this, all of these things start to shift towards table stakes. Mm-hmm. So we probably would expect all new cars to have power windows, mm-hmm. Probably remote start as well. These are things that used to delight us in the past, but now we're not even considering purchasing a vehicle without these things. They're just built into the unit.
Yeah.
How'd I do?
No, I think it's a good description, because I think my memory of the Kano model is this recognition that not everything is a linear function, that there are some attributes that have diminishing returns. There are some attributes that would become then a delighter, in that they might surprise a customer. So you can think of razor blades, for example. Like in the past, it might have been a delighter. I'm old enough to remember razors being advertised as like, no nicks or cuts. And that's probably now table stakes on a modern razor, that you're not having to attach pieces of toilet paper to Kleenex to your face, or use one of those styptic pencils that stops the bleeding. And then it might be a delighter when the razor blade either has an exceedingly long life, which is maybe bad for the business model of the razor blade company, but there are other features like, a moisturizing strip. Now I don't need to go through the step of putting on aftershave if that's so effective. And
the flex ball as well, right?
Yeah. But then I think it's important to think of you think of different cars and different customers, like the thinking of the range on electric vehicles. There's a new competitor to Tesla called Lucid Motors. I interviewed back earlier in an episode Keith Champion, who's one of the key Lucid production system people. He's a former Toyota person. So Lucid, says, well, we've got the longest battery range of a vehicle the size of a Tesla Model 3, has like a 500-mile range.
Wow.
So you think, wow, that's a delighter. That's even longer than the range on a Tesla. And Elon Musk, it's hard to tell how much of this is him playing defense or saying, well, I've seen tweets, of course, there's always a tweet of Elon Musk asking like, well, how long does the range really need to be? And maybe he has a point where once you hit a certain threshold, bigger range maybe isn't more delighting to the customer.
Right. If people are, isn't that kind of the business model too? Is they say, well, everybody's using these as commuter cars as well, mm-hmm. and they're only driving 60 miles at most on a given day, so they don't need to charge.
That was certainly the argument for some early electric vehicles that had 100-mile range or less. So so people can, and there's a diagram, people can Google Kano model and learn more about that there. I think that's a really interesting framework, and that's a phrase I hadn't seen in a while.
I think it's cool. I think that's one of the coolest things.
It's a very useful model. Another section of the book, there's a phrase here, and I'm going to tell a story real quick about it. What it reminded me of: see a snake, kill a snake. Now, do you remember? This might be. I don't know if you remember. There was a famous Ross Perotism about General Motors and snakes. I'll let you tell it then.
Well, no, I'll let you tell. I'll just say it was quoted in the book that I had a footnote for it. Yeah.
There's an old Ross Perotism. I'm not going to try to do. I'm hearing the voice, or at least I'm hearing the Dana Carvey impersonation of the Ross Perot voice of like, most companies, when you see a snake, you kill a snake. At General Motors, when they see a snake, they form a committee on snakes or something to that effect, right?
Exactly. And that's, I think there's an ethos to lean there too, is I think we get very sometimes tied up in doing the right tool and doing a fishbone diagram and, this, that, and the other. And sometimes it's just so easy to just say, no, let's stop doing that. I've recently started watching reruns of Bar Rescue, which, if anybody's seen that with a background in lean, that guy goes in there and essentially eliminates waste and creates standards and saves bars. That's the whole gist of the show.
If they're willing to be saved, but
yes, yeah. But that's his toolbox, right? So he goes in there, he sets standards, he eliminates waste, and I think a lot about that is just he's seeing the issues and he's just saying, stop it.
Mhm.
And I mean, you don't have to have anything more elegant than that. And I think that's something that we often lose because we like our tools and we like being in the know, but sometimes it's just that easy.
And sometimes we're like forming committees and talking about an idea instead of taking action. Yeah, I would love to interview John Taffer, the creator, the host of Bar Rescue someday, because like, especially like earlier seasons, they would talk literally about what he calls bar science.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was not just like you said, having standards and eliminating waste, but a lot of it I think was a pretty deep understanding of customer needs, of like what kind of, I remember one thing he would really emphasize a lot was, certain types of bar environments that a woman is not going to feel comfortable coming into,
right,
alone or in a small group. And he would say, like, I don't know if this sounds dated or sexist, but in a lot of cases, a bar with more women will attract more men, and that's good for business. And you want a place where all your customers can feel comfortable, and we can think about that in a lot of different ways. But there's the bar that the owner wanted to have, and then there's the bar, as you're talking about earlier, that customers would want, like the one where it was like a pirate themed bar.
Yeah,
and I think the market for a pirate themed bar was very narrow and very small. But I think that's one of those where John Taffer changed it to something more mainstream, and the owners changed it back to a pirate bar.
Right. I had watched one, and it was like essentially this guy was into motorsports, and he hurt himself, and then he, somehow, and then he kind of created a bar that was a trophy to his former glory days. And essentially, I think he came in and said, "What you want? Do you want this statue to yourself, or do you want a market-driven bar that makes money?" And I think, I think a lot about the goal, right? The Goldratt book.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of the business? What's the goal? It's to make money. Everything else, put that aside. And if you're not, aligning what you're doing to that goal, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah. A couple of things I think are fun to talk about here. When it comes to ideation, either working with customers, working with development teams, there's this 3-word question: how might we? Or how might we, with additional words after the fact? Tell us why that's a powerful question.
Yeah, this is something that I think goes back to Silicon Valley. It's certainly popularized in Silicon Valley if it wasn't created there. But a group called IDEO, which Google IDEO.org, they are pretty much the best organization at human-centered design. They've designed everything pretty much in Silicon Valley for the past 20 years. They have this phrase, how might we, which is really to help that brainstorming environment. Like we said beforehand, you can't brainstorm and evaluate at the same time. You can't come up with new ideas if you're afraid of being evaluated and being proved wrong. So how might we has just a very neutral tone to it. We're not saying could we do it. We're not saying should we do it or ought we do it. We're just giving this possibility of how might we make the product better. How might we serve this segment of customers without ostracizing another segment, like Mark was saying with Bar Rescue, right? How might we attract more females into the bar without betraying our core loyal customers? So that phrase of how might we is very important, and there's, I think, a lot of psychological stuff behind it as well. But really the idea is that it's a neutral phrase to just invite people into possibilities of change.
Yeah, and I've been exposed to that phrase. Joe Schwartz, who's at the Franciscan St. Francis Health System in Indiana, he was my co-author on the healthcare Kaizen books that we did. And a few years ago, I had a chance to visit their organization. And even in the context of Kaizen and continuous improvement, they were using that phrase a lot.
That's awesome.
How might we do such and such? Because it keeps the focus on the problem to be solved, the patient need or family need to be met, where I think a lot of times people get defensive, and there could be value in this. People will throw out, well, here's all the reasons why we can't do it.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I think it's helpful to turn it to, well, how might we make that possible? What would be necessary? What would have to be true? And I think that's kind of a related question you hear sometimes in strategy or entrepreneurship. If we're at the point of having an assumption, it's like, well, what would have to be true to make this then a success?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point about that natural propensity to say, oh, actually we can't, or, we already tried that, and, we can't do that because of these reasons. Oh, that's not what we're asking here.
Yeah, for sure. And then one other thing I was going to ask you, because I've seen this come up also in the context of psychological safety in an organization. So if you're having a meeting, if you're having a discussion, this is bound to happen where there's the risk of groupthink. So tell us about, you write about this in the book, the devil's advocate role.
Yeah. So in this portion of the book, there's several different ways. Essentially, we're getting at this idea of, again, creating an inviting environment, where it's okay to fail, where it's okay to challenge the status quo. And a lot of times it's not just people not giving out ideas, but it's also this issue of people giving out an idea and then everybody converging on it and saying, "Yep, that's what we're after." And again, when you think about convergence versus divergence, in this situation, we're not trying to converge on a agreed upon idea. We can do that later, but for now, let's just come up with new ideas. One way to do this is essentially exactly what you were saying earlier: is you have to have a devil's advocate person to say why something actually can't happen. The purpose of it is to challenge the status quo and say, challenge our assumptions. Are you sure that that's true? That won't work because of this, this, and this. And it's important. It's a very delicate position to have and to play with in a group, because people might take exception to somebody playing that role. So it's very important to kind of brief the group on this person's role, to clearly define that that's what this person is doing. They're not here to badger people and to make it difficult. They're really here to help us grow and expand our horizons. And I've even seen some things where they've said that people will still kind of have a negative reaction to that person, even when they know that that's the role they're playing. So it's a delicate thing, but it's still a tool to be used. And I wanted to incorporate that to say, buyer beware, but this is something that can really benefit you guys and help you all out.
Yeah. And I think it's a matter of having a balance where if we're trying to have most everybody oriented around how might we.
Right.
One other explanation I've heard for having that devil's advocate role is, a couple of things. Yeah. It forces you to challenge assumptions, you're saying. And then it gives permission, or it lays the groundwork for somebody else to speak up, when otherwise they might think, well, maybe I'm the only one who has concerns, so better to keep my mouth shut. Well, that's not helpful.
Right.
We want people to feel comfortable and safe speaking up.
That's right. It's about generating good ideas, and that's just one way to do it.
Yeah. So final question about the book. And again, our guest today is Michael Parent. The book is The Lean Innovation Cycle, a Multi-Disciplinary Framework for Designing Value with Lean and Human-Centered Design. So innovation is a word that maybe means different things to different people. It's a popular phrase, even if organizations aren't really into continuous improvement. They all say we want to be innovative, or that we are innovative. Strategy is an important topic for businesses. So how do innovation and strategy fit together the way you see these frameworks?
Yeah, I think I take probably a less than traditional approach in it. And essentially, I think innovation is always subordinate to strategy. I think a lot of businesses now really want to be, disruptively innovative. I'm going to be so disruptive that it's going to, penetrate new markets, and we're going to create something new that we've never done before. And I really have about 2 or 3 chapters cautioning against this kind of thought. And I use a lot of business examples to kind of showcase this. So in a nutshell, I would say, I think innovation is a business activity that needs to be subordinated to a greater strategy. And there are different ways that you could engage in innovation, architectural innovation. How am I going to redesign, a printer to be more user-friendly versus office-friendly, versus kind of this disruptive thing where I'm going after a new market. And I think there are different reasons a business would pursue one or the other. I'll mention two examples. I'm also a little bit skeptical of the first mover advantage. And I use the example of TiVo, this great product of the late 90s that totally, penetrated the market, and there's nothing left of them because they didn't pursue, essentially the first mover advantage that they thought they had did not pan out over just a very, very short number of years. And I'll also say, in terms of disruptive innovation, Apple in the 90s had this huge product portfolio, all very segmented, very disjoint. Whereas Microsoft had one product, the Windows operating system, and they innovated around that, and they kind of pivoted around that, and they built strategy around that. And you can kind of see, as you talk about, subordinating strategy to innovation, subordinating innovation to strategy, versus just pursuing innovation as your strategy. And it really took until the iPhone, which is essentially a new operating system, to compete against Microsoft before Apple was even a twinkle in their eye.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of cases where Apple is a first mover. I think, the idea of a touchscreen smartphone was controversial at the time, but then there are a lot of products where they by no means have been a first mover. Think of smartwatches.
Yeah.
Touchscreen laptops. They're not even a mover there. My wife has a Windows Dell touchscreen laptop for work, and any fingerprints on my laptop are because she has tried to also touchscreen.
That's right. And when you
scroll,
when you start thinking about that too, it is all centered. All those things that they were doing was very much centered on their iTunes software, right? You really couldn't do anything with Apple. I don't have anything Apple right now, but I still believe it's the case. You can't do a whole lot without that core. Maybe not now, but certainly
some of that's changed a little bit. But it used to be, updating the phone, backing it up, syncing it. That was all done through iTunes software. Now some of it can just happen natively with the phone as your only device. And I think maybe they got feedback about that. One other thing that comes to mind, I've been an Apple laptop user for over 12 years. And there was a generation where they did away with what were, to me, incredibly useful ports. As somebody who travels and consults a lot, they took away the HDMI port, and they've taken away regular size, traditional size USB ports. And I think there was a leadership change in Apple. And I think some people came around where I think customers are saying, I don't want to attach 3 different adapters to my computer to do very basic things. So Apple has kind of come back to me, from the voice of this human user. I think it's more human-centered design for at least how I use the laptop.
Well, wasn't it as well too that they got rid of the? I see you're wearing AirPods as well. They got rid of the phone jack or the headphone jack in the iPhone, and I believe the reason for that was the limiting factor in making it thinner and smaller. And that was one of the reasons. So, you've got a lot there. You've got the voice of the customer. You've got new product development. You've got design constraints on your existing products. So, they know what they're doing. I'm not saying they don't know what they're doing, for sure. And
it's a tough balance, back to the point from earlier of the voice of every customer is not the same.
That's right.
So, so the customer, I was going to ask you one last question about the book. Who do you think is the typical target customer for your new book?
Yeah. I'd say the typical customer is we're looking for people who are quality professionals, people who have a background in Lean and Six Sigma already, or at least an interest and basic knowledge of it. I don't think you could pick up this book without knowing a thing about Lean and Six Sigma and get a whole lot out of it. To be perfectly honest, that's just not what the market of the book is. So if you do have a background in quality, if you do have an interest in product design and really understanding empathy and delivering value to customers, I think it's a great approach to really learn new tools and new frameworks of understanding to benefit the customer and the quality movement as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope people will check it out. Congratulations, Michael, on getting the book over the finish line, not just getting it written, but congrats on it being available. So people can they can find the book on Amazon. They can also buy the book, and I'll make sure there are links in the show notes. Michael, where's the best place for people to find you online?
Yeah, so I am findable on LinkedIn. If you search Michael Parent or Michael Parent Consulting Services, I will pop up. I also have a consulting website, my personal website, which is sixsigma-consulting.com. And then if you hit /books, you can go find my book, which is available through the website on PayPal. And I'll say I get a little bit bigger of a cut if you do it through me. So I'm not too proud to say that, but
it's okay.
Please, yeah.
It's usually better for the author to buy the book directly from the author if you can. I've experienced that as well, especially if somebody wants to buy a bunch of copies for the organization. Go ahead and reach out to Michael, and you can probably do signed copies even then if they're buying through you, right?
Absolutely.
So again, our guest here the second time on the podcast, Michael Parent Consulting Services. The book title again, The Lean Innovation Cycle, a Multi-Disciplinary Framework for Designing Value with Lean and Human-Centered Design. So Michael, again, congratulations. Thank you for being here and sharing a little bit about human-centered design and the connections. And again, I hope people will go check out the book. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for having me.